Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us from in the world. Welcome to another Operation Separation. I'm your host, Shel Shapiro. Ooh, this is going to be a good one, all about identifying who you are. With me for that conversation today is Niti, Nadarajah. Did I get that right? Did I do it okay?
You did.
And I think what I'm excited most about for today's conversation is diving into the meaning behind your name, and a post I recently saw. But before I get ahead of myself, Niti, why don't you tell us more about yourself? Like, who are you? Where in the world are you? So that people know that, like, we span globally. We have these conversations. Everybody is excited to know. I know I'm excited to learn more. So tell us more about yourself. Welcome.
Thank you. So I am in Melbourne in Australia, which is quite cold at the moment, but sunny, which is nice. So the opposite, to where you are right now, I guess. In terms of a little bit about me, so I grew up here in Australia largely. I traveled a bit in the early years of my life, but grew up in Australia, had a very linear career path, sort of fell into law school, became a lawyer, was a lawyer for about 19 years. Still am a lawyer, but in March of this year, decided to leave my job and took a few months off and have just recently launched my ventures. And I say ventures because I don't do things by halves. So I have just started a coaching practice, which is working with mums in professional services environments to sort of help empower them and stop being stuck, I guess, is really what I'm all about. And then I've also launched a legal consulting business, which is effectively what I was doing before, but doing it through my own sort of separate standalone business. And I'm passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you'll hear me talk a lot about that or see me talk a lot about that on platforms like LinkedIn. What else? I guess that's what I do. I also have two beautiful little kids, so an 8-year-old and an almost 3-year-old who, are beautiful. And so that's me. That's me.
Yes, and I love that you have just started on your new ventures, so to speak. Like, you took some time away to figure out who you were and what you wanted to do more of, and I love that now you're also helping other women to do the same, to not feel stuck anymore. And that's what Operation Separation is all about. Like, finding your own way and then helping others to do the same, or like navigate their own paths. And so, I love a celebration moment. So let's do that for a second before I hop in further, if I can find it. Let's drop some confetti, because this is worth celebrating.
Awesome.
You're on
Why
some
not?
new ventures, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
I want to celebrate you for sure. Now, going back to taking some time to like separate yourself and figuring out what you wanted to do more of, and how that relates to identifying who you are. Well, before we even dive into like the meaning behind your name, which I so want to get to, what exactly was it that you were doing that you didn't like, that you knew you wanted to like change courses and do it for yourself? Like, what was going on?
So there are a few things. So I think firstly, my journey to where I am now has probably been a 2-year journey. And like many people, coincided with the pandemic, right? But I had always, for a very long time, like probably my entire career, felt satisfied and intellectually stimulated by what I was doing, but I'd sort of always felt that something was missing. Like, I went to law school and I loved reading about human rights and I loved reading about social justice. And those are the things that really excited me about the law. But when I when I became a lawyer and when I started my career, the first thing you do is kind of go into the corporate world. And so I didn't do any of those things that were the things that excited me about law. And so there was always this something that was missing, and I could never quite work out what it was, and I couldn't work out how to get it either. Like I was like, there's something missing, but how do I get that thing? How do I,
Yeah.
enrich my career and my life experience so that in 20 years from now, I can look back and say, yeah, I enjoyed what I did, right? And I had a great time and no regrets. And it wasn't until the pandemic, and strangely, writing on LinkedIn for me, that I started tapping into something a little bit different. One, I started exploring a side of me that had probably remained dormant since high school, which was writing and writing through story, which I used to love. Like, it was something I was so passionate about. Like, I used to write stories and poems in my spare time when I was at school, right? But it sort of fell away when I went to university. And all of a sudden, because I was looking to share my experience with people I knew, actually, I wasn't even thinking about the broader world of who was on LinkedIn, it tapped into that side of me, that creative side of me. And then I slowly started realizing that actually people were resonating with what I was writing, and that I was helping people to feel seen and heard, even though that hadn't really been my aim. My only aim was to share what I was going through, really, at that point in time. And so from that, I sort of started discovering, oh, hang on, this thing is like actually energizing me. It's allowing me to speak up about topics that I care really deeply about, but I've not felt that I had a voice in, or that I had a very small voice in, because my sphere of control was, I guess, how much I could control or influence things within my workplace. But all of a sudden, through being able to share my stories and my experiences and my views on life, etc., I was able to have a larger sphere of influence. And that really excited me. And there were a lot of things that happened around the same time. Like, I started really exploring my own privilege, the fact that I have grown up in Australia. I've got an Australian British accent's kind of a bit merged, but I don't have an Indian accent, for example, right? So that for me is a privilege as well, that I was like, unlike some people that come to Australia later on in life and struggle a little bit more through their career. And even my parents, I saw, had those same struggles. I was like, I don't have that. So I started exploring that as well, and how I could give back in the not-for-profit space. So all these little things started happening over 2 years, and they started confusing me, because I was like, what do I do with all of this, right? Like, it seems like there's something here I should lean into, but what is it? And what does that look like? And so the seed had been planted, and I think over the last probably year, that seed started to grow a little bit, and it started to really, become a little bit of a small seedling, and sort of started yelling out to me that, yeah, maybe there's something here. I think you need to lean into this, you can do something else. And so when it came to March, or actually earlier on this year, I think it was just at a point where I was like, I'm ready to be my own boss. I'm ready to do things my way. I'm ready to control my culture, my environment, work the way I want to work, organize my life around my family, and not just my family, but my friends, my passions, around looking after myself, things like that, and lean into all these things that have been giving me so much joy, which is why I'm now doing a few things rather than one thing, because at the moment I'm like, I actually want to lean into all of them, right? And over time, that'll probably shift, but for now, that's me, right?
Yeah. And you're doing more of what feels good for you. I
Yeah.
love how that kind of all unfolded over time,
Mm.
and you got back in touch with who you were previously with the
Yeah.
writing, found that you still loved it, still enjoyed it, and you could connect with people on that level, and then leaned fully into it, like, and
Yeah.
in a way that could help people to find themselves too. So that's what I'm talking about when I say, like, identifying who you are. Like, not that
Mm.
you had lost yourself completely. Maybe you
Mm.
didn't even know that that was there, or it had gotten
Mm.
hidden away or packed behind in a closet
Yeah.
somewhere, like, and it just resurfaced at the right time. You saw
Yeah.
it when you needed to see it, um, which I, I am honored to be like learning from you and having these conversations. And one of your posts recently that I had come across was all about the meaning behind your name. And I think you were doing it as like an introductory post of like, hey, if you don't know me, like, here's more about me. Like,
Mm,
here's what my name means. Here's how this came up in my life. And that losing yourself happened with your name too. Uh,
mm,
because that you're what we how we know you, Niti, like that your full name is like gets lost in that. You lost that for so long. And
yeah.
again, correct me if I butcher it. Nivedita? Is that did I get that
It's
very
actually, so
close?
if you kind of, so I say it differently if I'm like on a phone call to like a customer service center somewhere, then I very much butcher my own name, right? Like I go, it's Nivedita, but actually it's Nivedita. If you say it in Hindi, which is where the name originates from, it's
Okay.
Nivedita. But it's an interesting story, right? Because my parents gave me this name when I was born, obviously, and then they didn't use it, right? So it was just my official name, and they started calling me Nita. So they used the first two letters and the last two letters and joined those together, right, to abbreviate my name. Because they realized it was a mouthful, right? Like, you're calling a child who's been naughty or, whatever. It's a long
That's when you
name
use the full, yeah.
to yell at, right? So they were like, okay, we'll shorten this. So they shortened it, and then I started speaking, and I couldn't say Nita, so I said Niti, and so my name became Niti. And Niti itself, or Niti, as you say it in Hindi, is a name in its own right in India and in South Asia generally. But so the post for me was about there was a campaign running at the time. I can't remember who was running it. It might have been Procter and Gamble, I think. And it was all about knowing people's names and pronouncing their names correctly, because what happens with a lot of people around the world is they change their names to fit into the societies in which they live. So, for example, here in Australia, you'll see a lot of people from, say, China or Southeast Asia that will adopt or be given anglicized names, which they'll use in workplaces and things like that, because it's easier, right? It's easier to do that than to use a name that sounds foreign to people in Australia, right? But this campaign was all about saying, well, actually, we need to own our names and other people need to lean into that, right? And so
Yeah.
it's, how do you pronounce your name, and how do you allow other people to learn that pronunciation as well? And so my story was about saying, it's really interesting, because I used to have, like in school, obviously roll call and stuff. And on roll call, I had my full name, right? And so anytime I was in a new class, like at the start of the school year, I would just sit there and I'd go, oh God, here we go again, right? And I'd wait until they get closer to my surname, which was Gupta at the time, because Nadarajah is my married name. So it was Gupta. So I was waiting for, the EF, and then I'd be like, okay, here we go. And the minute there was a pause, like an awkward pause, or there was like a, like, I knew it was my name, right? And so I jump in straight away and go, it's okay, it's Niti, right? And I wouldn't even share with them the pronunciation of my full name, because I was like, you don't need to worry about it, right? And reflecting on that as I was reading all these other posts that people had shared about their own names, I was like, how different might it have been if people had actually lent into wanting to know more, right? And to really trying to going, okay, well, that's great. Tell me how you pronounce your longer name. I would love to know
Yeah.
how to pronounce it. What does it mean,
Yeah.
etc. Sort of that curiosity, as opposed to the relief that I saw generally on teachers' faces when I said it's okay, right? Because what ended up happening was that I would just despise my longer name to the point where I would tell my parents, when I'm old enough, I'm going to change it by deed poll because I don't use this name ever and I don't like it, right? But how much of that feeling about not liking my name was about the fact that people weren't leaning in
Yeah. Nobody
to
ever
wanting
tried
to
to learn how
know
to
about
say it.
it as well, right? It was just awkward and
Yeah.
just weird, right? Um,
And it made
so
sense
that's
for
me
you.
reflecting on that. Yeah.
It made sense for you when you were younger and trying to learn how to pronounce your own name for you to shorten
Mm,
it. But I could see how, looking back, you might like, how powerful would that have been for you to just lean into having
mm,
them use your name and calling you by that, and you being able to, yes, this is my name and this is how you say it. And then maybe you
yeah.
had to correct them a few times until they got it right. Or
Mm,
like you had to remind them, no, please use my full name. I, I could totally see how you would look back on that and wonder like how
mm.
different would it have been? But we're here and you
We
go
are
by what you
here.
want to be called. And if you don't want people to call you your full name, then that's fine too. But
No.
I think it's worth identifying though that your full name is a very powerful name. And as you are on this journey now to help others, help women lean into who they are and to get unstuck and to do more of the things that they want to be doing, your your name actually means like one who is dedicated to service, one who is
Mm.
naturally able to encourage people that are frustrated to move ahead in their life. So how powerful is that, that the
Yeah,
name
it
behind
fits.
like what your name actually means, or one variation of what your name means, because I'm sure there's many, many definitions, and I just picked and like did a quick Google search, but like this is what you're doing now. This is like
Yeah,
you're leaning into your name, even if you're that's not how you like to be called.
that's true. And I hadn't thought about it like that until, yeah, until people started asking, what does it mean on that post? And I was like, actually, this really fits, it makes a lot of sense now, right? And it's funny like that, isn't it, with names, how they can, you know, they can really be such a big part of your identity, and not just as a name, but even the meaning behind the name can be, really what's the right word? I'm looking for the word and I can't find it, but just meaningful, I guess,
Yeah. I mean,
resonant.
they describe who you are as a person. It becomes
Mm,
more than just the name for someone to call you by. It becomes
yeah.
part of your identity, which is perfect for like identifying who you are. But a lot of times we're given names as kids, even nicknames, and they stick because they just do, or it's easier to
Mm,
say, or because we want to make it easier for other people to not have to pronounce our full name, or because there is a joke behind it, or whatever the reason is. But sometimes they stick because there's meaning there. And
yeah.
like for on my end, like I think of Shell, and that's why I've shortened it from the longer Michelle, as like for me, I'm a very protective structure. Like I'm
Mm,
sometimes a little bit hardened on the exterior, but I'm very structured on the inside too. Like I move in certain ways and I help other people to feel that safe, protective
yeah,
shell around them. Like I create safe spaces for people to have conversations just like this. And so the name Shell actually like has a lot of powerful meaning behind it. It's not just
yeah,
the name. Um, and it's tied to my branding in so many other ways that we don't even need to go down that rabbit hole right now. But like what your name, like I just want to encourage people to lean into who they are and identify that. And if
mm,
that comes from your name, so be it. If you want to go by something else that is more of a better like representation of who you are, that's great too. But identifying the core parts of you that you want to show people and show up that way, whew, when you start
so
doing that and leaning
powerful.
into it and finding who you are, your identity, that it's such a great thing, right?
It
And
is, it is.
and again, I want to celebrate that you've leaned into this over the last few years.
Yeah.
and really like now you're doing the thing. There's no going back and like putting the blinders back on.
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's pretty eye-opening, I think, when you start leaning into it. And I found myself really examining things like, what are my values? What am I passionate about? Like, what do I really stand for? What do I want to be known for? And not just from a work perspective, but even as a parent or as a person, what are the qualities that I want to be seen as having, right? And it's interesting too, like as a mum of a 8-year-old, it's something I've been leaning into with her as well, because I find quite often, at this age, they're going through that stage where it's like, I think I'm going to be a teacher when I grow up, or I think I'm going to be a whatever it is. I think she said an engineer the other day for some reason. And I'm like, okay, you don't need to decide what you're going to be, because what you're going to be is going to change, right? Like might change numerous times. You might start with something, you might do something else 3 years later, then you might do something else, And so I've been trying to explain this to her that, it's just a starting point and it doesn't define who you are. But what does define who you are is the way you show up in the world. So rather than focusing on what do I want to do when I grow up, let's focus on who do I want to be, right?
Love
And
that.
let's really lean into that, and let's try and work on, okay, how do I want people to see me? What are the things that I love about who I am, right? What are the things potentially I want to work on a little bit so I can show up differently? These are the things that are important. The rest of it will fall into place
Yeah.
somewhere, you know?
Yeah. So I these are conversations that you're having with your daughter. Um, do you have similar conversations like this to help your coaching clients too? Like how are you helping them to identify who they are and the things
Yeah. So
and
look,
how they want to show up in the world?
yeah, so things are very new at the moment, right? So I'm only just getting started, but it definitely is something that's a big part of how I'm going to coach, is going to be really looking at, okay, who are you? Because I think one of the things, particularly for mums, is, you've had this career, like, whatever it is, for however long. So you've had this identity attached to this career, and then you go on leave, you become a mum, and then you have this new identity that starts forming, which is the identity of mother. And when you have these two identities, what happens somewhere along the way, quite often, not always, but quite often, is that you lose yourself in amongst these two identities. So these two things become who you are, right? And so I think sometimes it's really important to be able to, and it happened to me too, right? And this is why I'm wanting to do this now, because I'm like, there were things I could have done differently, right? I could have approached things very differently than how I did. But I think, it's important to step back from that and go, okay, if I peel back these two things, right? If I peel back mother and if I peel back lawyer, let's say, who am I, right? Who is Niti the person? What do I want out of life? What are the things that I value in life, right? And I think when you can look at it from that lens and then go, okay, and I've got my career and I've got, parenting, how can I look at that differently now that I have a better understanding of who I am? Because I think that's what often happens, right? We lose that ability to see with peripheral vision, right? When we have these two things and these two identities are just, they're narrow,
Yeah.
right? And so we don't know how to make sense of, okay, I've got 500 things here, I've got 500 things here, I've got to do them all somehow. Well, no, actually you need to step back from that and go, okay, who am I, what do I value? And now let me look at what I have on my plate, because
Yeah.
then you can more easily go, let me strip this away, let me strip that away. I don't need to be doing that. Someone else can do that, right?
Yeah. And
So
figure
yeah.
once you know how you want to show up in the world, you can say, all right, well, knowing that this is how I'm going to show up in my career. Knowing
Mm,
that this is how I'm going to show up as a mother. And
Exactly.
they're not mutually exclusive. It's not one or the other. It can be both, and you can do both
Mm.
successfully and then some, as long as you are clear about the things that are important to you and how you want to show up.
100%. And it also means, I think a lot of new mums end up facing a lot of bias and perception issues when they return to work, right? Because of systemic biases that exist around parenting. And I say parenting on purpose because I think it affects men too, but just differently. And so, they face all these biases and stuff and they go, oh, well, do you know what? I've got a job. I'm a mum now. I've got to look after the kids. I'll just coast, just go under the radar and just, okay, it is what it is. I've just got to deal with it. Right. What
Yeah.
I want to help women do in that situation is go, I don't have to coast under any radar. I don't have to just settle. If I know who I am and what I want and what I value, then I can make more empowered choices and decisions around my life and my career. So if in that instance I go, do you know what? My values conflict with the values of this organization that I'm at, I can go, okay, do you know what? I think it's time I find another job. And yes, maybe that's going to be a little bit harder as a new mum, but hopefully with a little bit of work and a little bit of confidence and getting rid of some of those self-limiting beliefs, we can start moving forward to a different reality, which means you're not stuck in this place of underwhelm, right? This
Yeah.
place of ugh, I just got to do it because I've got to do it, right?
Yeah. And you're not
It's really
tied to that one
decifying.
identity of who you are and how you show up.
100%. Yeah, 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 yeah. So that's really what I'm hoping is to really help women just get unstuck. Just realize actually, you've got so much going for you. It's just you're not seeing it in that moment. So you need to rediscover that and go from there.
Well, I'll relate to not being able to see something when we're so close to it. We have blinders on. We can only, it's
Mm,
blinders and tunnel vision. Like you can only see as far as the thing that's right in front of you. But if you have an outsider to help you that you
yeah.
know and trust, not just saying go up to a stranger, if you have somebody that is not in that muck with you, they can
Yeah.
kind of guide you. And I'm not saying that they will pull you along in one direction or another, but they can be
Mm.
like, all right, well, here's what I'm seeing from that
Mhm.
perspective. Here's what I see from an outside perspective. And here are what I think might be good options for you. And then bounce it back. Yeah, here are all the things. What do you think about that? And then that's the
Yeah.
starting point for a great conversation, because if you never saw it from that angle, maybe it took somebody else pointing it out for you to consider that option.
Or at least, prodding the bear, so to speak. It's kind of okay, because my fundamental belief is we all have the answers within ourselves, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's just they're suppressed under layers of other stuff that we've just chucked on top, right? And so it's okay. How do we unpack those layers? How do we remove them and go, okay, now tell me, what do you see, right?
Yeah.
Because all of this is about who you are yourself, right? So I can help people, guide people in different directions. At the end of the day, they need to come up with that answer, whatever it is that works for them. For me, what worked for me, say at the start of this year, was leaving my job and starting a new adventure in entrepreneurship. That's not going to work for everyone, right? For some people, that might look like staying put, but doing things differently in
Yeah.
their job. For other people, it might look like taking a step back from their career. For other people, it might look like moving jobs or, I don't know, moving countries or just doing something different, right? Or showing up differently in the world. So there are so many different options available to people for where they can go or who
Yeah.
they can be, right? But it's just helping facilitate them into a place where they can go, I understand who I am now again. Because we also change, right? This is the other thing that's important is we change. as we experience life. And so each life experience that we have alters who we are. So if we don't check back in with ourselves every so often to go, well, who am I now? You
Yeah.
know, you're going to be thinking of yourself as this like version from yesteryear, which may not necessarily be who you are now.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting point too, because I have had conversations with people where like I bounce an idea or like I present them with something that I'm seeing that maybe they can't see. And I'm under no pretenses that I have all the answers. It's a
Yeah.
conversation. It's open-ended.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I've had conversations where then it's bounced back, "Oh, well, that's not me. That's not who I
Yeah.
am."
Yeah. Yeah.
Or like, "I've tried that and it didn't work." Or like, there's resistance to
Mm.
seeing that possibility. Okay, cool. I
Yeah.
that's not the
Cross it
end
off the
all be
list.
all. It doesn't mean that I was right and you were wrong or you're right and I'm wrong. It's just a conversation to get the ball rolling, to start
100%. Yeah.
to like look at other possibilities. Um but it makes me wonder, like, for the for those that are quick to jump in and say, "Well, that's not me." Why is that really not you? Or is that not how you want to show up?
Mm.
Or
Good question. Good
or
question.
is it like that was me and I know I'm not there anymore? Or
Mm.
maybe they just don't realize that this is how they're showing up, even if they think they're over here in a different space.
Yeah.
So when people are quick to respond in that way, it just makes me want to ask more questions to get to the bottom of it. Because yes, if you are absolutely like adamant about the fact that no, this is not me. This is not how I want to show up. This is not how I want people to see me. This is not what I want to do. Cool, I'll leave it alone. But
Mm.
if there's still some disconnect between you saying that and then you're still showing up a certain way, well, where is that disconnect happening and why?
Yeah. 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 Absolutely. I love that. And I think it's really important. And I think we often jump in with like trigger reflexes, right? Almost like where we're like, oh, no, that doesn't sound like, no, no. I mean, and look, to be honest, if someone had said to me 2 years ago or 3 years ago, why don't you try your hand at starting your own business? I'd be like, are you insane? Like, no, never. That's not me, right? I would have said exactly the same thing. But it's because I hadn't done the work to understand who I am, and therefore I didn't know the gamut of things that were open to me, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's important, as you were talking about just now, to step back from that, do the work first, right? Before you work out where you're going, it's almost, okay, let's start with who you are. And that's why for me, from a coaching perspective, my first conversations with people who are in this sort of like quandary is going to be, let's unpack who you are. Let's talk about who you are first. And let's really work on that, get some proper understanding of what you actually mean, right? And stand for in this world. And let's look at whatever the issue is that you want to be dealing with. Because once you've got that clarity, it allows you to see things differently, I think. And we don't often do that in those situations which you were describing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the work that you're diving into right now, I know you mentioned the coaching and then some of the legal work. Is your demographic mostly women that are also moms? Like who should be reaching out to work with you?
Yeah, so because I've got a few different things on the go, my demographics are quite broad. So, from a coaching perspective, definitely my target demographic is mums or mums to be, even, or even women that are planning to become mums in the future, women that have been mums for a long time but feel stuck, right? Like, so even women that are like, out of work for a while and looking to go back into the workforce, willing to work with anyone who sort of fits across that spectrum, right? And to be honest, like, if someone else wanted to work with me who wasn't a mum, that'd be fine too, right?
Yeah.
It's just that's my target demographic. And then the legal stuff is working with corporations, so that's a bit different. And then I'm hoping to really do a little bit of work in the DEI space as well, in the sort of consulting space. So again, that's kind of, anyone who wants to really make some difference in that space. And that's kind of like, for me, a huge passion area is how do you actually facilitate change? Because one of the things when I was working with a coach myself earlier this year and trying to work out exactly who I would coach and what my niche would be, was I was like resisting having it just be women. And because I was like, but part of this issue is around, looking at it from the other perspective too, and looking at it from the perspective of the males and, the partners of women, for example, who are on maternity leave, or male managers, right? And how to support these people through parental leave. And then I was like, actually, no, my whole lived experience is me as a woman going through the journey of having a child and working through that. So, I need to lean into supporting women, but from a DEI perspective, for me, that issue is far broader, right? So I see this as having three sort of angles to it. There's the coaching element for the women who are going on parental leave. There's advocacy element, which is more about social change, right? Which is something I do anyway and continue to work on. And now I've lost my train of thought. Coaching, advocacy, and there was something else.
The DEI space.
The DEI space,
Yeah.
right? So this is this workplace change, right? And how do you create workplace change? So there's workplace change and there's social change. Right? And the social change is more about the broader system, right? Like government, society, etc. And that's some of the stuff I do through storytelling and things like that on LinkedIn. But then there's the workplace change. And for me, that workplace change is where the DEI work comes in, and really starting to try and facilitate different conversations in that environment. And not just around parenting either, because I have broader interests in DEI than just parenting. I come from an Indian heritage, cultural heritage. So I'm quite interested in the whole race space as well, and the intersections that come with DEI. So, yeah. I don't know if I answer your question. So my demographics are kind of like here, there, and everywhere.
And that's totally fine. I think it's quite timely too, given what's going on here in the US, where, like Roe v. Wade was overturned, and women's rights and access to healthcare and reproductive healthcare is in question, in jeopardy. And that's not necessarily a rabbit hole that we need to go down right now, but it shines this light on women's issues and women's rights. And it's not just a women's issue. It affects men. It affects everybody in the workplace and at home, the way that we're navigating these conversations. So I think your coaching and your legal advocacy and the conversations in diversity, equity, and inclusion are all so timely, because people are having these conversations now, and it's important. And women especially have stayed silent on them too long, because it's ingrained in our society, and how women show up in the workforce. And it just can't anymore, because our lives are at stake. So yeah, this conversation is so timely, because we need to know who we are in order to be able to fight for our rights. And I say that as a woman, but I also say that as a human.
Yeah, 100%. And the I guess the issue of what's going on in the States is it's horrifying on so many levels for me, but it's really interesting now, seeing the reaction and seeing how different people are reacting to what's happening, and the antagonistic nature of some of the conversations that are out there right now are kind of what is, it's worrying me a little bit, right? Because it's, I think in this space of DEI, and this is something I firmly believe, communication is a two-way street, right? And if you want to convince someone of something, you need to reach in and see how they're going to react to what you're sharing. And people won't always react the way you want, and people won't agree with you, because that's life, right? And that's what happens. But there's so much shame at the moment out there. There's so much shaming, and there's so much like violent language in the way people are talking about this topic, where I'm like, it's grandstanding. How do we actually move forward from the point of grandstanding to actually achieving change, right? And moving the needle. And I think that's something that goes for both sides of the fence. Like, it's not limited to one or the other, but it's how can we in the DEI space really facilitate conversations that stay true to, what we stand for and what we believe, but on the other hand, also speak in a way that is going to bring people in rather than turn people off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Challenging.
It's a challenging,
and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole anymore with the abortion stuff, because it's, oh my God, some of the stuff is just horrifying.
It's a challenging conversation for sure. But one that's important to navigate. And even if that means like
100%.
towing the line or like saying something regardless of the backlash that or repercussions that you may have to face because of it, it's just so important. I almost like what's coming up for me right now is a need to share my female history of being a woman. But I am a little reserved at this particular moment because of the backlash that I may face for sharing. But it's nothing new. And so why not? Let me just dive in and give you guys, I'm not known for a short story, but I will try to keep it brief. Like, I'm not a mother, and I do have this great desire to be one at some point in my life. For now, I'm just enjoying being a great aunt to my niece and nephew and to other people's kids. I'm a great auntie as well. At some point, I will probably also want to be a governess. That's a whole other conversation, because if I can't have my own kids now, and if nobody's going to advocate for my rights to become a mother and to stay healthy, then that kind of takes a lot of things off the table. And so a governess may be my only route to do so. But I mean, let's talk about women's reproductive health and issues. Like, I was raped in college. I'll be completely transparent about that. I've talked about it before. I want to be talking about it more. It's still a little bit uncomfortable for me, which is why I'm speaking faster as I say it. And I got sick from it. I didn't get pregnant. I didn't have an abortion, but I got physically sick from it. And since then, I have had other feminine issues. I will probably have and continue to have issues for years to come. I will probably struggle to get pregnant when that time comes that I even am ready to try. I will struggle. If I do get pregnant, I'm going to struggle to keep the pregnancy viable. And all the conversations that are happening right now around women's health and women's rights and abortion versus not abortion, pro-life versus like whatever. This directly impacts my trajectory as a human. Like, if I cannot get care, if people will not advocate for my health in every step of the way, like, this is a serious, especially as I'm bouncing around the country right now and like on this journey of like shell across America and like finding myself through changing my lens and my perspective and my location and all these things. Do I need to leave the country? Like, is this a conversation that I also need to be having? It just opens the door and opens this rabbit hole, this can of worms that does not look good. And it's scary.
Yeah, I hear you.
And who am I if I take away that identity, that desire to be a mom? Like, that's part of that's still part of who I am and who I want to be. So
Yeah.
that's how I'm tying it back to identifying who I am, is because who am I without that? You remove that and I lose part of who I want to be, how I show
Yeah.
up, how I
Yeah.
interact with other people and take care of their kids and interact as a parent, even if I'm not one yet myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to have to do some really deep digging and have a lot of hard conversations, not just with myself, but with other people to navigate this. And I'm not the only one.
No.
That's just one perspective. That's just my perspective on it.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you.
So
I hear
yeah,
you.
I think it's very timely that we're having this conversation. It's certainly stirring up a lot of things for a lot of people, but
Yeah.
yeah, I'm feeling the feels right now, and thank you for holding space for me to share that, because I don't speak on it nearly enough out of fear.
Yeah.
So,
Sending you love.
whew. Yeah, other places in the world don't have to have these conversations,
I
because
know.
they've challenged the system and have things in place to support women and their health and advocate for them.
And this is the thing, right? Like it's not necessarily going to stop abortions, right? It's just going to drive them underground, and it's going to drive women to do things that are quite extreme in those situations, potentially, right? And that's the real risk. It's what are the ramifications of, saying no? And there are so few exemptions from what I can tell so far in the states that have now, enacted their trigger laws.
Yep.
It's yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's
It changes the
dark
narrative
dark
for sure.
times. Yeah, it's dark times. Yeah.
Yeah. Whew. Thank you,
Oof.
Niti, for allowing the conversation to go there, if you will. I know that's not what we had planned on chatting about,
Mm,
and it just, when it comes up, we just roll with it, right? Um, so I wanna navigate back to you a little bit.
yeah.
How can people find you and connect with you to have more of these conversations? How can women specifically,
Mm,
especially, have more connect with you to have more of these conversations if they're feeling stuck?
yeah. So the best place to reach me is definitely through LinkedIn. It's where I tend to live from a social media perspective at the moment, at least. I'm still in the process of building websites and other things at the moment. So LinkedIn, DM me. We can then set up a call to have a chat, no obligation, because I'm also aware that, with things like coaching, you need to find someone that works for you. And it's so I may not fit with everyone, right?
Yeah,
And so you need to work out to begin with, A, is the energy right? Right. But B, can I
absolutely.
actually help the person through whatever issue it is that they're wanting to work through? Because I'm not going to be able to help everyone. And there might be someone else that might be better placed to help, a
Yeah,
particular woman. And so, maybe that might be a case of me referring that person to someone else who might be better placed to help. But for me, that call is the sort of, it's the start of things, and really identifying, okay, where can we go somewhere from here? Can I help you? What does that look like? And then let's work from there.
I love that. I'll make sure to drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat, as well as the show notes. Feel free, everyone, to connect with Niti to have a more in-depth conversation about what's keeping you stuck, and where you can go from there. And as she mentioned, if she's not a good fit, there are so many more amazing supporters out here. And we will do our best to connect you with somebody that we know, if there's somebody in mind that would be a better fit for you. Um, it's all about collaboration. There's no
It
competition here.
is.
There's
Yeah.
room for all of us
Mm-hmm.
to do our thing.
100%.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'd like to wrap it up now. Join us next week for another Operation Separation. I've got another amazing guest coming on to have another conversation for change. I'm excited for it. I hope you'll tune back in. We are going to be on LinkedIn, YouTube, so you can watch from either platform. If you're catching this on the replay or at any time, feel free to leave comments in the chat or questions. We will make sure to answer them. I always make sure that I respond to everybody, at least like to thank you for coming. I try to be more intentional with it though, and like add in some nuggets there. But yes, we love having you. We want you to come back. We want to have more of these conversations, and we want to make sure that you feel good about the things that we are putting out here in the world. So if you are liking these conversations, please make sure to follow Shell Station for more ways to separate yourself. And until next week, I'm saying bye for now. Join us, same Shell time, same Shell Station. Whew, another one in the books.